Great. So, hello everyone. Welcome to one of our open climate calls. This is call number 12, and we are going to be talking in this call about how digital infrastructures can be a critical response against climate change. And again, the meeting is going to be recorded, so bear that in mind when you do your interventions. And for today's conversation, we are going to have Nahira and Marcia Nobrega from Tech for Forests. They are both from Brazil, and I'll let them introduce themselves after I do the housekeeping issues. So of course we'll be recording the call, and thanks Nahira and Marcia for being here. We really appreciate it. So we'll be recording the call, transcribing it, and sharing it on Appropedia as we usually do. You can follow the agenda and take notes in this Google Doc that I've pasted just here. You can go ahead and introduce yourself in the introduction section and leave your email if you want to receive an email about future calls. And also a note that we always make sure to clean up emails from the Google Doc, so your emails won't be displayed publicly at any minute. It's just for us, we keep it internally. You can also use the Zoom chat if you experience technical difficulties, or if you want to make any comments as Marcia and Nahira are talking. Please mute yourself if you're not speaking. And of course, we want to acknowledge that we're still in a pandemic, believe it or not. And we're also amid compounding crisis, inflation, climate crisis, whatever it is that you're experiencing right now. It is important to acknowledge that. And also to acknowledge that everyone experiences it differently. And so let's please be kind and caring. And you all know the purposes of these calls, or at least some of you already know that we are doing these calls to better understand how the open movement can respond meaningful to the climate crisis. This is our season 2, and we are very happy to have you all here. And again, for today's call, how digital infrastructures can be a critical response against climate change. And for this, we're going to have Marcia and Nahira, and then the floor is all yours. Please go ahead, introduce yourselves, and let's kick it off.
Thank you, Evelyn. We have a presentation. Is it possible to share?
Yes, it is possible to share. Let me allow you. So you should have permission to share.
Let me try. Okay. Sorry, this might take some time because I cannot really find. I don't know.
You should have the share screen button on the...
Yeah, I have the share screen button, but I cannot really find which one of the options I should use here, because it says a lot of things.
So you should be able to share the, what's the format that you have your presentation on? Oh, it's a PDF. So you should be able to select that window.
Yeah, so it's not really here. Maybe Marcia, can you try?
Yes, let me see.
If not, you can also send it to me through email and I can share it.
Oh, good idea. Let me find it here.
Oh, and I'm also realizing now, sorry about that, we're experiencing some technical difficulties that the Google Notes doc was only allowing for comments. I've changed the settings, so now you can actually edit the Google Docs and take notes there and leave your email if you're interested in coming into future calls.
Sorry for this, Evelyn, I'm just sending it to you. Oh,
Great.
sent. Maybe you can share.
And maybe while we're waiting for this, you can go ahead and introduce yourselves, maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so hello, everyone. I'm Nahira. Today, we want to explore a little bit with you all about our project that has been developed for the past 2 years. Yeah, so thank you for sharing this. It's a conversation about digital infrastructures and the rights of land defenders, especially indigenous communities here in Brazil, and more localized in the Brazilian Amazon, and about their territory. So if you can go ahead. What we are going to cover here is who we are. So we have like a very quick presentation about Marcia and I and all the other collaborators that we have in our team, and what we are researching and what we've done so far and where we want to land by the end of this project. So we are researchers, but we are also activists that work on the intersection of technology and society. And why is that? It's because this research is actually a result of our activism. So we are different people with different backgrounds, all located in Brazil. My name is Nahira. People call me Na, so it's fine because I know that's really hard to pronounce, Nahira. And I'm based in Brazil. My native language is Portuguese. My pronouns are she and her. My background is in sociology and technology. And most of my background in the past years has been working with digital security and information security for social movements and indigenous communities in the Brazilian Amazon. Currently, I'm also a core contributor and user researcher at the Tor project. As Portuguese is my native language, so I want to apologize upfront. If you don't understand anything, you can like ask any questions and everything. I know there are a lot of people that are not like native English speakers here, so please just ask if you can't understand anything. Marcia, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Marcia. I'm an anthropologist and I'm a Portuguese speaker too, and I apologize for any trouble here. And I've been working with traditional population, traditional people for about 15, 20 years between the backlands and now the Brazilian Amazon. Backlands, I don't know if it's the correct translation for sertão we call here. It's another biome. And now currently I'm part of the Tech for Forest, this organization, and the Escola de Ativismo, it's another organization that advises various indigenous and quilombolas organizations in the legal Amazon. So we are making the risk diagnosis also, and in part of this diagnostic, we do the digital care of these organizations. So we are in the territory of them nowadays, and all these threats that we can see in this killing and missing of the Bruno and Dons. So we are very impacted of this situation now, and we are talking about this, and we help with these people that they were engaging with. So that is, and we have another two guys with us that they cannot be here today with us. There is Luciana, she's a popular education, a pedagogue, and Bruno. Can you introduce Bruno, Nahira, please?
Yeah, so Bruno is a philosopher and most of his background has been in logic and computational things. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit later about our specific research. So you can go ahead, please, Evelyn. Thank you. We wrote this project that became what we are calling now as a collective of researchers that is called Tech for Forests. We were not a collective back then. We were just people that occasionally worked together. And in the end of 2020, we were supporting some indigenous communities in the north of Brazil in the Amazon region. And we had this eager to support them more with their digital infrastructure. And we have been facing so many issues in the way that had to be with learning, with building community, with the process of giving technology and not accompanying with this with literacy. And so we decided to try to understand better how this process was working and how it was really helping these communities, because they were the most impacted communities, not only by technology itself, but by the people that are trying to harm, to create other kinds of technology that in some cases of our research, we call it predatory technologies. So we came with this project that has this main question, which is, can digital infrastructure be a critical response to the fight against climate change? And how can we collaborate with the indigenous communities in the fight and recovery for their rights and protection in their territories? So one of the things that came in a report by United Nations in last year was that indigenous people are the best guardians of the forest in Latin America and the Caribbean. And especially because we still have a lot of native communities in these countries in Latin America and in Brazil, and they live in protected lands. Specifically here in Brazil, we have, or maybe we used to have, an organization protected by the state to protect the rights of these people and the rights for their lands. And the regions that we have, the forests here in Brazil, are the regions that these people live and protect their lands. Therefore, they are the best guardians, because there is nobody else, no other instrument to protect those regions. And these are the regions that protect our climate. So when we try to support them in their fight, we are also aiming to this goal of responding to climate crisis. So we can go ahead. So when we decided to go further with this project, we understood that our response, our act as activists couldn't be just like completely partial, in the terms that we are not just saying things that we want to say, but we are really trying to understand what the field is claiming and how these technologies, these digital infrastructures are being built, and if they are being created to support these people, or they are just being used by these people to support their fights. So we have some questions here that we wanted to approach and to understand, because we also found a lot of projects that are created, open source projects are created to support these communities, but they struggle a lot with many things. They struggle a lot with sustainability, and they struggle a lot with funding. So we are trying to understand, like, how is the relationship between developers, funders, and the community of users, if there are any kind of relationship that is not just bureaucratic, for example. So one of the ways was trying to understand the challenge of the users using these technologies, because this kind of technology that are created to support a specific, the guardians of the forest, for instance, are technologies to map the territory, to report on any kind of harm or any kind of attack in their territory, and then to communicate with others. But if they don't have internet access in their territory, how they use these technologies? This is one of the challenges that we found during our research. So if you can go ahead. And then we came with a timeline to go ahead with this project, and I want to invite Marcia to talk a little bit about this.
Okay, let's go. We work with the methodology of the ethnography, but we had this issue, that's the pandemic thing. So we have to remodelize it and do some adaptation with this. The literature review, we work a lot of Manuel Castells in the Network Society, Information Age, the things. But we work so much with these witches that are Donna Haraway, Isabel Stanguer, Marisol de la Cadena, where they help us to think together with theories such as Davi Copenau and Ailton Krenak, that are indigenous people, as well as another native thinkers that we have the honor to meet in our field activities. So that's our approach, and this kind of literature and making symmetry with these big theorists, white theorists, with these native people. And that is, we have we could do some field work when the pandemic goes easy, dealing with the another fields that are the another practice, activist practice that we have, as Nahira said in the beginning of this talk. So we met the Guarani people, we met some people of the upper Amazon, and these and then with this we had some community calls. We have 2 community calls, one with 3 organizations, that was Alertas Mais, Mapa Digital Guarani, e o Hermes Rhizomatica. And the other one was Collab and the Projeto Siwazi, that was it's a project that make some parcery with the Rede Mucambos. So that is in few words about, and we are now doing some articles. We are writing these in that moment to the end of this project, and then we will do a last community call, and you are all invited to, and then do a report that we will publish in our website, something like this. We are now working in this, and you can go forward, please. One more, please. So that is, we have 4 journeys in the same goal, these people that we introduced in the beginning, with different approaches. Then I will talk about 2 of them, and then Nahira, the 2 other ones. Please go forward. So the approaches is this, and the first of one, we will work with the power relation, communication, and digital infrastructures. The other one is that one that I'm working with Luciana, that it's the cosmological impacts, what happens when the remote reaches the so-called remote territories. And the other one is the building communities, fight predatory infrastructure, and the development open source program, that is the article from Nahira. And at the end of this, we have an interview with a developer that Nahira will explain further. Please, can you pass the other one? This is the article from Bruno. Yes, that's okay. You can go back.
The one before.
Yeah, the one before. Yes. And he couldn't be here with us, so I will read this. Okay, okay, it's communication and power. communications plays a conditioning role in the establishment of power relations, as it is through the transfer of information that takes place through it that meanings are produced and shared. This affects the way people think, which ultimately conditions the meaning of the action they deliberate for themselves and for the community of which they are a part. Taking into account the technology of communication, the digital age, which extends to several domains of social life through a network that is at the same time global and local, generic and personalized, it follows that the constructions of power relations takes place each time, more in the field of communication. These constructions, which articulates technology, communication, and power in the same place, puts into debate a plurality of social actors who base it on the visibility of the debate of the interests, reconfigure power relations. That's the approach of Bruno's research. So you can go forward, please. And that's mine with Luciana. The answer is this, does the internet enhance the indigenous struggle? So we are writing about two case studies, one with indigenous people from the upper Rio Negro, and the other one with the Guarani people in the south region here in Brazil. And our hypothesis revolves around a practice that we are calling now anthropophagisation of code. That is, from a problematization of the terms develop users, how can we think this term, if it's okay for these people with their relationship with the technology. We can call the user, or we can call us developers, what having between these two terms, how it is possible to establish the communication between the parties of the fight for the defense of our threatened territories. So how terms such access, prohibition, limits, use, and any other ones are swallowed, we call some deglutidos, anthropofagizados, in the practice of indigenous involvers. In here we have a joke with these terms, desenvolvimento in Portuguese and envolvimento, that what call involvers. So we have we are now trying to think the cosmological impacts of the arrival of the internet in these territories that was facilitated by the COVID, by the pandemic ones now. So you can go forward, Nahira, in the next ones.
Yeah. So just before, I know we are about of the time of this presentation, so I'm going to try to take around 3 minutes to end this presentation. And just before I jump in this, I wanted to explain a little bit that, as you know, this project was fought in the end of 2020. We didn't know how COVID was going. So the field work that we expected to be doing was completely different. Also the methodologies, we have to work with what we could. And when we work with indigenous communities, I don't know if any of you have experience, particularly here in Latin America and in Brazil, but you have to be invited to be there with them. You can not just show up and start asking questions. You have to build and create a relationship. So this research, the part of research that I am doing is around building communities and how it is important not only for indigenous communities, but also for developing open source software. Because when we call about open source, it's not just like you create a code and open it and put it in GitHub. It's not just about that. If you don't have a community to support your code, to support your project, that is going to be completely outdated. Nobody will care about it. So building community is something that is really important. So we are trying here to understand the relationship between the user communities of these open source softwares that are working to support their struggle, to their rights, to their protection. It's not just any random software, like we have a lot of open source softwares that the indigenous community are using, but it's not exactly created to support them specifically. It's created for any kind of user. So when we are talking about these specific users, what are the terms that we have that surrounds it? So we defend in this specific research that it starts with affection, with building community. And well, we did a lot of workshops, interviewed, field work when we could to understand the asymmetry that exists between these people that develops the software, the other ones that funds the software, which are not the same in this case, and the ones that use it. What happens in between all these three actors? Because we need to understand in order to create recommendations to even adjust and work with literacy with these user communities. You can go ahead. And in the last one, we had a developer that was working with us, but he started a new job. So we tried to adapt his work with us into an interview, because this person has decades of work, of working with open source communities in general for social justice. So it's like working with open source communities to create a software to support journalists or media activists. And then in the past decade, he worked specifically with an organization to support indigenous communities here in Brazil. And he developed one of the open source softwares that we were investigating. That's called Alerta Mais, which is a software to map and report territories in the indigenous communities. So we talked a lot about the challenge, the needs, and how the interaction between developers and users usually happened, and what are the points that, in his opinion, as an open source developer, it should have more attention from funders and also from the people that wants to support these communities. And this is actually the state of art right now. We are late with this project. We don't have it ready to present all the results with you. Like, we can talk a little bit about the challenge that we had, but actually in the past month, with the kidnapping and killing of these two amazing leaders and supporters of indigenous communities here in Brazil, we were all very impacted. And right now, as we are also activists, we are trying to respond to this incident. And just like a lot of communities are coming and asking for more support with digital security, information security, and other kinds of security. So we are like in between, trying to deal with other things, that is like how you create a research at the same time that you want to support them. And that's it. Thank you so much. Thank you, Marcia. Thank you, Evelyn.
Thanks for being here and for presenting so far how you've been doing this research. So now the floor is open for anyone that has any questions. So you can either unmute yourself, or if you want to like raise your hand, you can do so. But before anyone raises their hand, I'm actually like, when I saw the so this one is very hard to say in English, right? The anthropophagization of code. I was like, of course, right? Like, so I'm gonna like provide a little bit of context, but like probably Marcia or Nahira like can do it better than I will. But basically, this is a very Brazilian term. This is a very Portuguese term. It's anthropophagia in Spanish, right? But it's this idea that was born, I think it was around the 60s, right? And it was one of the most original ideas ever produced in Latin America. I'm gonna be like, like very good idea of like, oh, you don't have to like take all the colonial ideas that come here, but you can also like kind of do a cannibalist act over those ideas and like reintroduce themselves with your own culture and with your own context. So I thought that was like brilliant applied to code, right? And so I kind of want to like see if you could talk a little bit more about how do you like came into like this concept, right? Or how was it that you were like, oh, this is the route that we have to take?
Okay, it's hard to pronunciation even in Portuguese. Antropofagização do código. And it's an issue that we realized being filled with them. So the problems that we see from here is other when we with them in the territories. So the arriving of the internet it's a big issue nowadays. So territory that doesn't have any kind of technological communication, digital communication, now they have. So the youth people are so impacted with this, and the mothers are very worried about this, and the os pajés and the people that are the trouble in the spirit, that are involved with the spiritual issues, are very worried about this arriving of these issues. So what people are trying to do what can we do with this now, these people? So we white people think, okay, indigenous does not be able to have cell phones, the mobile, so they are not more indigenous if they have technologies. So, but that's not truth, we know, and they can't stop that thing. So what we are trying to do is understand the use of the technologies, how they use this, and how can we do this interface between our knowledge and their knowledge, and in between this. So that's a big challenge we are facing now. These threats in the territory, they are following the access of the points of internet. So we do one point of internet, and then the miners go on either and that's go on. So what can we do with these people, and how can we do with respect of their cosmological approaches? So is that okay? Limit their access? Is that okay? We prohibit them to access the internet? I don't know. I don't think it's about this. So this question is we have to point a question, not to respond that questions, just to listen them, and then trying to do a kind of translation in our terms. So how can we help this? How can we be allied with these people that are the guardians of the territory? So that's our point, I think, in this collective that we are part, me and Nahira, and I think all of us that are here. I think but you just talk in a nice way, Evelyn. I think it's about this. Do you want to talk a little bit about this, Nahira?
Go ahead, Emilio, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know where to begin with this question. So this weekend I've been reflecting a lot about Paulo Freire's work, and I wanted to write something about it, but I've been stuck. But I think this can bring a little to the conversation, that discussing a little bit about how working with indigenous communities might bring us to the realization that technologies are like Coca-Cola. You know, like when you give Coca-Cola to a baby the first time, it's like overwhelming, right? And it can become addictive, as it has been, sugar addictive to us, etc. So in terms of the openness, like the open movement, we always think about, let's make all the knowledge of the world available so people can solve problems, etc. But I think now with disinformation, with harmful uses of technology, we have to think of how to prepare ourselves and how to prepare communities to dive into knowledge, right? So yeah, so what are your thoughts when thinking about people who are brand new to technology in some extent? How should we pose our questions in terms of the knowledge that we bring, or how we open the doors?
I can start answering and jumping if you think about something also, Marcia. This is also like a really challenge, I think, but one of the, I want to say, like, the basic principle that we use is following the methodology of education from Paulo Freire that you just mentioned, which is like making with. So it's not like we're getting there with a black box of things, of tools, and just giving to them, like, use it, use that, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't work with them, because we have to create relationships and to actually really understand what are their needs and how they use technology. And if it doesn't really make sense, this kind of digital infrastructure that we are going there with. And the other thing is about like translation, which, like, when we translate things to English, for example, we use this word that is localization, which is like making this local. So this knowledge has to be part of their reality and make sense from their cultures. One of the things that made us wanting to make this research was that we were in a workshop with a lot of people and many indigenous communities. And when we back then, when we started some kind of workshops with them, we usually started with a question that was, what is the internet for you? And like, it was around like 30 people answering. And then the last person was this indigenous woman that is a leader in her community. And she asked, I'm going to like quote her. She said, the internet is like the shaman. It is the only defense we got. He heals the threats that are not identified by doctors. He makes vigilances, even from distance, and he knows about everything that is happening. The internet is a tool that we use for communication, information, and training for the defense of people that are killed because they fight for their territories, for their rights. And when she said that, it was like, in our minds, because we never had a concept about the internet like that. And it came from her. And it was just starting, it was day one of the workshop. So it was all her, it was nothing from us. And it made us like understand how she created the relationship between the internet and the shaman, and how it works, and how she uses it, and how it makes sense for her community. Even though we know, as Marcia just mentioned, that the internet is also being used against them. So like in the research from Bruno, when he talks about communications and power relationships, he talks a lot about fake news and how during COVID, the internet came to the indigenous communities and with a lot of fake news, and made them like do not want to get vaccines because of that. This is one of the points. The other point is like how loggers, how illegal mining people are using the internet to access and explore their territories, and to know when there will be an inspection, and then to flee the place without leaving traces, just the exploration of the territory. So we know that it harms, but it also protects. And this is like a paradox of the internet and the digital infrastructures in their territory.
Jean-Noel, you want to go ahead and ask? Or Marcia, yeah, go ahead.
Another question that we make from them is when we are in this in the territory of them is in this Paulo Freire line. We ask about them, what is security? How can you feel secure? How can you feel safe? And often we ask them to draw. They love this, and one of them, an indigenous leader, some in one occasion he said, I feel safe when I have the domain, when I know when, where we are stepping with, what land is our land, and this is the kind of deglutition and the cannibalization of the code. So how they can leave the domain of their lands, even in this new digital world. So how can we say that Davi Copenauer fall off the sky, and how can we access the internet by the sky? So they draw trees, big trees that they have to get up of them to get some internet signal. So that's the line we do in our approaches with them. We ask, and then we try to understand what they are talking, what their necessities, and something like this to go on with our work with them.
Yeah, maybe just to jump in here, and thank you very much for such a stimulating kind of set of issues that you're naming here, which as a Canadian, as a settler, white settler in Canada, these are issues that that have come up obviously over multiple decades, you know, as it relates to decolonization and issues around Indigenous sovereignty. And just one kind of parallel that I've seen made in the Canadian context that I think speaks to kind of the broader type of like reframing that can happen when you start kind of focusing on Indigenous kind of like data sovereignty, is how, you know, and I'll just kind of drop the link here. You're probably already familiar with them, but the OCAP principles in the Canadian context, that when we look at the roots or the origins of OCAP principles, and you apply them against or to protect yourself against surveillance capitalism, the transferability of OCAP to the relationship between citizens and corporations and private sector kind of digital infrastructure and those types of issues, that's not often a leap that's made. We often kind of silo the Indigenous kind of data sovereignty conversation separate from kind of private sector kind of you know, rights and regulations. And I think that speaks to kind of the broader issue around kind of indigenization of kind of data governance kind of concepts and regulations as well, that may or may not be explicit. In the Canadian context, we had a you know, Alphabet, you know, a sister company of Google, come into Toronto, major city in Canada, wanting to develop a whole neighborhood. And the conversation around ownership, control, access, possession of data, all the terminology, you know, you could find parallels into the Indigenous data sovereignty discourse, but we weren't necessarily naming that. So I'm just kind of saying that it's been, as an open data activist, it's been it's kind of a ground for a very rich dialogue between cultures in the Canadian context that is transferable to kind of a broader set of issues around surveillance capitalism. So it's less a question, but just kind of like an observation of how this translates into kind of non-Indigenous kind of discourse in a very, very important way. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that.
Yeah, just adding a comment. We know that there is a lot of eyes in the Amazon right now. And there is actually a project funded by a lot of funders here in Brazil that's called Eyes on the Amazon, which is kind of funny to try to understand how people are working with indigenous communities in the Amazon, because we have like some countries in the Amazon, and most of the protected population, and also we call like the isolated indigenous communities, which are people that have zero contact with people outside the forest, live there. And I think it was last year, I didn't go to this travel, but Marcia did, to a city called São Gabriel da Cachoeira, which is in the Amazon, in Brazilian Amazon. And it is the most indigenous city in Brazil. And in that very moment where she got there, Elon Musk was also there, because he wanted to bring internet to the indigenous communities in the region. So and this was something that was not communicated by anyone, anywhere. Nobody knew about that, but it was happening. And now, like months later, it has been communicated to like civil society. But it should be had communicated before. Like, how can we measure? How can we understand the impacts? How can we support these people? Because if you just like this is one of the things that we also saw happening with some communities, like technology had been given without any kind of literacy, any kind of understanding of harms. It is something that you get access to the internet and digital infrastructures in the late 90s, because you grow with technology. The other thing is getting it in 2022 without having been using it. And it has some much more different levels of harm than it had 20 years ago. So yeah, this is happening. And it's hard because it is everywhere, and we are not that many, but.
Yeah, and I'm seeing that Marcia is sharing something there in the chat too. That a choice is important. So if they don't want to come into contact, yeah.
Yes, just to point that these isolated people and Bruno that was killed 2 weeks ago, they worked very close to these people. And it's important to point that, to highlight that this isolated thing is the one choice. They choose to not be in contact. So how can we protect these people in their their option to be not in contact? And that's other challenge in this interconnected world. So that's just this I wanted to point.
Okay, I see that some people it's running for another meeting. Thanks for the people that was here. I don't know if anyone wants to ask any other question, make any other comment, or yeah, Gui, go ahead.
Hi everyone. I'm Guy. I'm an anthropologist, worked with indigenous from Brazil as well. I've worked in indigenous communities for years, and then more recently sort of shifted my focus towards programmers, so turning programmers into sort of my indigenous people now, I guess. And yeah, first of all, thank you so much for the session and for the presentation. I think it's brilliant. I wanted to ask, like, how do we get developers and programmers on board for this? Because I think it's really tricky, and I'm sure you all know that much better than I do, but I just kind of thought maybe I'd ask that because it's something that I worry about a bit as well. Like, how do you get them on board, especially like people, you know, especially with the kinds of salaries that programmers make these days. I know, like, for example, just to give an example of one community that I know relatively well, the Ruby community, the way that a lot of open source stuff in Ruby gets done is by having massive companies like Shopify, for example, funding that sort of work. So Shopify now has a team of 45 developers that they don't do anything apart just open source work. And I'm not saying that that's an avenue. That's just one of the ways. And yeah, just want to get your thoughts on that. But again, thank you very much. It's great.
I can try to answer, not really sure if I have like a solution for this, like a definitive answer, but this is something that we, at question, we asked the developer that was working with us, and he actually created a timeline of how the open source software, but especially free software, not just exactly open source movements, but the free software happened here in Brazil, so maybe kind of localized, but we have like a history. When it comes to Brazil, it had happened basically a lot of establishment in the United States during the WTO protests in 1999. And it comes for us in Brazil as a movement, a free software, as a movement, actually. So a lot of people that are eager for change, for social justice, for understanding about how technology can change things, can open for freedom of expression. So we have a gather of people that are very interested on understanding and learning more about technology and code and system administration and how it can support freedom of expression, especially because there were a lot of movements around freedom of expression back then, but also how you can support like land defenders in the beginning of 2000s here in Brazil. But it changed. Like 10 years later, it all had changed, and many of the new people working with free software or open source, they are more connected to the market, to the state of the private sector, because of course, as you said, it is something that has an income that is so much more higher. So this person, this developer, he said, we decided to go inside the movements because it didn't really make sense like to ask developers to come work with us. So it's like you go for a movement, and who here is interested in learning more about code, about programming, and has the eager to change stuff. And they were like tutoring these people, mentoring them to understand and learn more about open source or about coding. And I am one of the results of this. So I was just a teenager when I started working with these people, and I worked as a programmer, system administration. Today I'm on research, but I did all of this kind of trainings as well. And well, maybe this is the solution, because what we see here is that you have to build community to make an open source software last. How can you maintain, how can you sustain if you don't have community? And the community that usually exists when they feel they are involved with the mission or with the software that is being proposed. So yeah, I would say that this is one of the paths, one of the ways of doing it.
Alex, do you want to ask? No, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a quick answer, so I'm realizing we don't have much time. So one of the themes in our conversations so far has been that the end users often have different questions than the software and the data like want to support, like, and so the amount of work between like what someone on the ground needs, like an indigenous community needs, and what is available under open is just, it's a huge gap. And I'm wondering, like, are you experiencing that same massive gap? And are there is there need for investment in stuff other than the open source community getting better at working with indigenous communities, like information literacy, data literacy, like social practices for using information? Yeah, like where do you think that other set of problems is?
Yeah, that's a hard one. But okay, what we have here, most indigenous people use a lot of cell phones and cheap ones, Android cell phones. So if they have a computer in their village, it's usually a community computer that the school uses to show them other things, but usually it is Android phones. And it's hard to compete with things, some softwares, for instance, WhatsApp that has 0 rating, so they don't expand their data because they don't really have money to buy data, internet data. So WhatsApp is easy for them, and sometimes we know that it is important for them to communicate in a safer way. So what kind of alternatives we find? They find alternatives themselves. Sometimes one of the things that we found out in one indigenous community is that they were using Braille to communicate. And we had no idea, and they were using Braille because they didn't have internet access, and you could use Braille to communicate through Bluetooth. So they were exchanging communications using an open source software that we had no idea that was being used for that. And I want to say that one of the challenge, it is internet access. The fact that if they don't have internet access, they cannot even update the softwares that they have inside of their cell phones or even the Android itself. So one of the projects that we are researching is Hermes. I don't know if you know about it. Maybe Marcia, can you put it on the chat, the link to them? So Hermes is also an open source software that's developed by an organization called Rhizomatica, which is a software that is kind of converting radio signal to the internet. I really don't know how the technical aspects of that, but this is how they made possible for some communities to communicate in between, because they use a lot of radio signals. I don't know if you, Marcia, you have something to add here? Such a hard question, sorry, Alex.
I think that we are right on time to finishing the call. So if Marcia, you don't have anything to add, I think we're good to finish this. And again, thanks a lot, Marcia and Ahira, for being here. And also, we want to acknowledge that we use English in these calls mainly. So also appreciate a lot the effort to speaking another language. So thanks for that too. And well, thanks everyone for being here today. And we'll see. So we're gonna take a short break of the Open Climate Calls, and we'll be back in August, at the end of August. And also we'll be sharing with all of you whenever Marcia and Ahira have the date for their community call, we'll be circulating that too for September. So thanks everyone. Bye.